Top national security officials for U.S. President Donald Trump discussed war plans in a Signal group chat that mistakenly included a prominent journalist. At least 23 people were killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, Palestinian medics said on Tuesday.
South Sudan is teetering on the brink of a renewed civil war, according to a top UN official.
Top national security officials for U.S. President Donald Trump discussed war plans in a Signal group chat that mistakenly included a prominent journalist. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, wrote about his unprecedented experience on Monday, saying he didn't think it was real at first.
Sounded like the people I know who are in this administration. Nevertheless, it wasn't until Saturday that I was reasonably certain that this wasn't a hoax, that I had actually mistakenly been included in a conversation of the Principals Committee, essentially the leaders of the national security community, including the head of the CIA, in this discussion.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was one of the officials who had shared information in the group chat. After the story quickly spread, he tried to discredit Goldberg.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does.
Meanwhile, Trump claimed to be unaware.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it.
The story sparked concern among both Democratic and Republican lawmakers about how sensitive information could so easily leak. The National Security Council said the messages appeared authentic and added it was looking into how Goldberg's number was added to the chat.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said a planned visit of the Second Lady Asha Vance and that of senior White House officials to Greenland is not a provocation. During a cabinet meeting on Monday, Trump took a more conciliatory tone, casting the visit this week as based on friendliness. He claimed to have been receiving positive overtures from the island, although authorities there have expressed concerns ahead of the visit.
Yeah, well, not provocation. This is friendliness, not provocation. We're dealing with a lot of people from Greenland that would like to see something happen with respect to their being properly protected and properly taken care of. They're calling us, we're not calling them.
Greenlandic Prime Minister warned of American aggression and lamented what he called a mess caused by the upcoming visit from Vance. The U.S. Second Lady is set to travel to Greenland this week as Trump continues to suggest the U.S. could take control of the mineral-rich Arctic island.
Please raise your right hand.
At least 23 people were killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, Palestinian medics said on Tuesday. Several hospitals across the enclave announced they had received bodies, including several children. It comes as the United Nations announced on Monday it would reduce its presence in the Strip by about 100 staffers after an Israeli tank strike hit one of its compounds last week.
The strikes claimed the life of a UN colleague from Bulgaria and left 6 others from France, Moldova, North Macedonia, Palestine, and the United Kingdom with severe injuries, some of them life-altering. The location of this UN compound was well known to all the parties in the conflict, and I reiterate that all parties to the conflict are bound by international law to protect the inviolability of United Nations premises.
A building belonging to the International Committee of the Red Cross was also hit by the Israeli military. Israel said it fired on the building by mistake after falsely identifying a threat from militants. The operations of aid workers has been heavily affected since the ceasefire in Gaza collapsed last week, according to a spokesperson of the UN's humanitarian office, although the full impact of a UN staff reduction remains unclear. Israel has also cut off all food, medicine, aid, and other supplies to Gaza's population for the past 3 weeks.
Israel's parliament has passed a state budget securing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition and granting him months of political stability amid growing public pressure over the war in Gaza. Protests erupted outside the Prime Minister's office and Knesset in Jerusalem, with demonstrators blocking roads and forcing ministers and legislators to walk to the parliamentary building. The rallies also called for negotiations to secure the release of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Opposition leader Yair Lapid condemned the budget, calling it theft and accusing the government of cutting the income and future of Israel's middle class while shamelessly exploiting those who work, pay taxes and serve in the military. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich criticized the protests, describing them as a bankruptcy of the rule of law and urged police action against demonstrators blocking access to Knesset. The budget vote was a critical test for Netanyahu's coalition, which includes ultra-nationalist and ultra-Orthodox parties.
Thousands of protesters from the opposition in Turkey staged a rally outside Istanbul City Hall on Monday evening in support of the mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu. The protest came after İmamoğlu was ordered officially jailed by an Istanbul court on Sunday, pending trial on corruption charges. On Monday, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called for an end to the mass protests.
Daha önce de birkaç kez çağrıda bulundum. Bugün tekrarlıyorum. Provokasyonlarla vatandaşlarımızın huzurunu bozmaktan artık vazgeçin. Cesaretiniz varsa yolsuzlukların, hırsızlıkların, alınan rüşvetlerin, yapılan usulsüzlüklerin hesabını verin.
İmamoğlu's detention last week sparked the largest wave of street demonstrations in Turkey in more than a decade. Later Monday, anti-government protesters clashed with police amid the growing demonstrations. The Istanbul mayor is widely seen as the top challenger who could most likely defeat President Erdogan in a general election.
Crises such as the war in Ukraine or Trump's tariffs on European products have led citizens to ask the EU to invest more in defense and security in 2025.
And since that time, it's been picked away.
There has also been a growing demand for competitiveness, as well as the strengthening of the economy and industry in order to face global challenges. A view that has become more widespread among the younger generation. Among the priorities Europeans keep on the list for strengthening the EU's position in the world, the most popular are economic. In contrast, food security and agriculture, as well as climate action and emissions reductions, fell by 5 and 6 points respectively. There has also been a slight increase in demand for education and research. The European Parliament presented the Eurobarometer results on Tuesday.
Defence and security has remained stable compared to previous survey. In times of more uncertainties, people turn to the EU. For example, we see in the survey that's very high. The 74% of the Europeans believe that the EU has benefited, being part of the EU benefited to them. And it's the highest data that we have been recording since the question was first asked in 1983.
European citizens also call on Parliament to take into account the cost of living and the employment situation. The perception that their standard of living will neither change for the better nor for the worse in the coming years is the most widespread among respondents. However, 7.7% more Europeans than in 2024 believe that their standard of living will get worse. More than ever, the public appreciates being part of the European Union. Specifically, 74% of those who voted, a result which has not been obtained since 1983.
The top UN official in South Sudan warned the country is on the brink of a renewed civil war after the government postponed the latest round of peace efforts. UN Special Representative Nicholas Haysom said violence is escalating as elections approach and political competition between the country's president and vice president intensifies. Haysom noted the two sides don't have sufficient trust in each other to steer the nation towards a democratic path. South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011 following decades of conflict. It descended into a civil war as forces loyal to the country's president and vice president clashed. The conflict claimed the lives of more than 400,000 people before a peace agreement was signed in 2018. While elections were initially set for 2023, they've been postponed twice and are now expected in 2026.
Commemorations have been held in Germany, France and Spain for the victims of the Germanwings plane crash 10 years after the tragedy took place. 150 people were killed after the passenger jet, which was travelling from Barcelona in Spain to Düsseldorf in Germany, was deliberately downed by its co-pilot in March 2015. The victims included 16 students and 2 teachers from a high school in the western German town of Haltern am See, who were returning home from an exchange trip to Spain. In Haltern, students placed roses in the courtyard of the Joseph Koenig High School, while hundreds of people gathered in front of a plaque bearing the victims' names. At 10:41 a.m., the exact time of the crash, a moment of silence was held. Wreaths were also laid at the town cemetery, where some of the students are buried. Elsewhere, relatives of victims travelled to the site of the crash in the French Alps, while commemorations were also planned at the airports in Düsseldorf and Barcelona.